Welcome, everybody, to the Divine Council Worldview podcast. We're your hosts, but not maybe of this episode. Rich and Mel, here to tell you about an event sponsored by the Michael S. Heiser Foundation and Drina over there that will be happening May 2nd and 3rd. It's called the Image Conference. It'll be at New Purpose Ministries in Anderson, Indiana.
All this information will be listed. The link for the registration will be there. It's at the Michael S. Heiser Foundation.org. Go there, look under the events tab, and you'll see it. There's a form to fill out. Again, it's free. There's no cost. There's even some recommendations for some hotels there in the area. So we look forward to seeing people. We look forward to talking to people, connecting, and having some really good conversations. Really look forward to it.
Welcome to another episode of the Divine Council Worldview podcast. We'll be handling in this episode Genesis 16, and we're actually going to be getting not much. Well, the entire story of 16 deals with an interesting character called the Angel of the Lord. So certainly that'll take our attention in this chapter. And this issue is certainly one that the Divine Council Worldview jumps on and says, look at this, right? The Angel of the Lord. Whatever we do with it, we'll have other dominoes that will tip farther down the way. So, Mike, this is a good time to kind of pause and ask, what do we do when we, even as brothers in Christ, even coming together on a podcast like this where we have a common worldview, but we may, see, and I don't know where you're going to land on this. I know where Dr. Heiser did. And so when we talk about something like this, where it seems to me that there can be differences of opinion, it's so easy to get frustrated or to claim that someone's not doing it right, or how come you say this, or how dare you even, or something like that. And I think it's always good just to pause before we even get in the possibility of that kind of issue, and A, admit it happens, B, admit that social media doesn't help, because we get to do, the equivalent of drive-by shootings on social media, where we get to say things and hide or walk away. And you and I have both experienced, sad examples of it, I'm sure, within the Christian brotherhood, where, frustrations are given or felt. And I say that, curious how you're taking this, as well as admit, Mike, for me, this is one of the geniuses and the beauties of Mike, Dr. Heiser, for me, was that I'm going to quote Carl Jung, the German psychologist, on this: know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. And that reminds me of Mike and how whether we decided to do this or just found this to happen between us, we became friends before we became theological companions. And that was so helpful for our, 40 years of conversation, where he would laugh at me for my view. I would laugh, or, try to laugh back, and those kind of, but where we really differed, and yet there was just such a beauty of being a human soul first and being a Bible enthusiast second. How's this sounding to you? I mean, I think we both have illustrations in our minds, memories of where this got painful and even problematic. So
I think just, it often comes from, I think, at least growing up in Western culture, we have this concept that we have to be right. And if you can't be right verbally, then you have to use might to be right, and so on and so forth. And I think that concept about being a human soul to another human soul is something that we all find appealing, but we just really have had very little practice in actually doing that in real life, because we haven't had, and this is where, like, for my background growing up in a very urban setting, like, that is the kind of thing you have to learn how to navigate, is that you're going to be encountering many, many different people groups of different backgrounds and different ethnicities, even different upbringings, and even different ideological views. And yet you still have to find a way to coexist within an urban setting where everyone is up close, everyone is tight. You're all shopping at the same grocery stores. You're all drinking coffees or eating the same foods, and you can't have a fight break out every time.
And imagine going to the same church too. Yeah, imagine being part of the same
and
church
I think,
and having a disagreement.
I think one of those core things that has helped always ground me back in is that concept that we all human beings were created to be imagers, representatives of the living God. And we are all at different stages or at different proficiencies on how we're doing with that, or what does it mean to represent God in a way to all creation and to one another. And I think that is where the focus needs to turn back to. That one scholar I know, the image of God is so important because for this scholar, it essentially is part of what it means to be human. That it at a very core level, it comes down to how do you treat another human being? And do you treat that human being kindly, or are you treating them as though they are possessed demonically? And I think that's sometimes within the DCW, like within this worldview, people can get very, very up in ante on like, you don't exactly hold to the exact same thing that I'm holding, and equate that as though somehow that disqualifies you from, one, not just only the DCW community, but also from being human. So thus I can treat you as though you're not human. And I think if that starts happening, there needs to be a dial back of stepping back and realizing and remembering this is another human being who has been created in the image of God and deserves dignity and respect just as much as you do too. Not because of anything they have done or you have done, but because on the very base foundation that we're all made as representatives of the living God. Yeah. And it's nothing that we had ever done ourselves.
Yeah. Well, we and I bring it up here because here we go with a classic moment in the text where I know opinions differ, and here we go. I'll be happy to give you my opinion, and I certainly expect to get yours as well, Mike. So here we go. 16:1. Abraham has just come out of a story where he has made a covenant with Yahweh, and he is going into this new world of knowing that his progeny will someday go into slavery or something like that, and then they'll come back to this land 400 years later. So anyway, he doesn't have a child yet, and yet he's been promised a huge boatload of kids, and so 16 is important. 16:1. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, born him no children, and she's 85 at this point, I believe. So she had an Egyptian maidservant. Now, again, that Egyptian word Egypt came up in 12, where Abraham had gone to Egypt, and remember he met the Pharaoh and such. So the first-time reader, I think, would have said at least had the sense of an ouch here, because Egyptian has just that connotation of oops, to an Israelite. The reader of this, of course, would have remembered what Egypt did to his forerunners. So kind of like to a Viking fan, when you say wide left, you are digging in that painful moment of the 98 NFC Championship game where the greatest team of all time, the Randy Moss Vikings of 98, missed the Super Bowl because of a field goal, right? So when you say wide left to a Vikings fan, they know what you mean. When you say Egyptian to an Israelite, they know what you mean. And it's there's some kind of pain involved here in the sense that we have a foreign national, a goyim, someone outside of the Abrahamic family line, which again, we're only starting, but at least we have that word put there. It's also repeated in verse 3. So let's go on to it. Go into my maid, verse 2, perhaps I shall obtain children by her. Now, again, read a good study Bible on this, or cultural study Bible. The idea of children, or even being married in the ancient world, had a lot to do with progeny, more than just, getting your house and your white picket fence. You're actually trying to build an economy, a small economy with your family living in a tribal situations. So the idea of having children by a surrogate was not uncommon, still isn't in some world situations. Abraham heeded the voice of Sarai. Verse 3, then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife after, or his woman. So again, we're not talking probably legal wife, but she becomes the forebearer of this boy to come. Verse 4, he went into Hagar, she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress, that would be Sarai, became despised in her eyes. So there is in the story a uncomfort, at least to say the least, between Sarai and Hagar because of this child that's born. Verse 5, then Sarai said to Abram, my wrong be upon you. I gave my maid unto your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. Yahweh judge between you and me. So I guess we can keep moving. I have nothing more to add than we have a kind of a normal story in that world of having a child through a surrogate, and it causes family pain. So Abram said to Sarai, verse 6, indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. Again, she is the property of the husband and wife here. So Sarai gets to do what she wants. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her presence. Notice how the text is not condoning this story. It just admits this is what happens in a story of normal human beings who sometimes don't get along. But
and
verse
Ron,
7, of course, gets our attention.
Here?
Go ahead.
So the one thing I didn't notice as you were reading the text, it mentioned how Sarai said to him, well, in the New King James, it says, please go into my maid. In the ESV, actually it says also, go into my servant. And so that word, the verb go, I did look very quickly while you were going through the remaining verses. I went back to Genesis 6. And when I looked at Genesis 6, the sons of God are described as going into.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's euphemistic for sexual intimacy, usually. So,
yeah, and which is very strange, right? Because as a Christian growing up, the thing that I always heard was, sexual intercourse or intimacy was known with the word knowing, like Adam knew Eve. Here, this euphemism is different. It is almost as though it's very, very technical.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, that was just something very interesting to me. It was just like how it almost has a procedural, just do this act versus that's the sense of intimacy that would be from knowing.
Come across, I think, even to Abram. We need not think that there's any romance involved here. This is, again, how you build an economy in that age, is you have a large family, especially of boys. So I was teaching a class once again a few years back, and how did this come out? I asked her on the side, or where were we, a girl that she was from Ethiopia, and I somehow implied or asked, what's your goal in life, or what do you want to do? Something like that. And she said, I want to be the first wife of a husband. And she put the emphasis on the word first. And of course I caught that, and I said, what do you mean? She says, well, if you're the second wife, you're not loved. And you're used, but you're not loved. And so that was her goal of life, to be the first wife of somebody. And that was just 10 years ago. All right, so 16:7, the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, and by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, and then we'll get into that. Now, this is the first occurrence of that phrase in the Bible, the angel of the Lord. It's the first occurrence of the word angel, in fact. So if someone says, didn't we already have an angel in 322, the cherubim that guarded the way to the tree of life? Well, there's the problem. See, that the word angel here in 16:7 and cherubim in 322, I would argue, are not related to each other. And it's only by means of a modern disservice to the church that angelology has included cherubim among the angels, shall we say. So this is, and I have a book, I just grabbed one of them off my shelf over the years, because I did my dissertation on angels and gods, as did Mike. Our libraries, our personal libraries, just exploded on any book about gods or angels, even if they were bad books, and we knew they were bad, but we bought them anyway, right? And I'm not going to mention even the name. Well, I'll mention the name of the book. I don't want to, again, pick on the author. 99 Answers to Questions About Angels, Demons, and Spiritual Warfare. And of course, that would grab anyone's attention, right? 99 Answers to Questions. Here is what, and the reason I grabbed this is because it's a classic case of what happened. How did we come to view angels? How did we even get the word angel in 16:7 would be what I'm going to go toward here. He says on page 19, he's just introducing the concept of angels in the book. Thus, the word angel commonly identifies a supernatural being who plays a mediating role as a messenger between God and humans. So, okay, fair enough. And he's saying that's what I'm going to call an angel. He's a mediating supernatural being between humans and God, between God and humans. And as such, you know, there's a divine counsel worldview built in there, but it's also just a pretty bland supernaturalism, I would even call it. But then he says on page 21, you turn 2 pages and he's talking about what angels are not. And he says this, angels are not gods. Angels are not minor deities like the ones in Greek mythology. Such a view of angels would amount to polytheism, a belief in many gods. Now, very slyly, and I'm sure, Mike, you caught that because you know where this is going. What he does is say, well, angels aren't gods because gods are the Roman pantheon. Thor, Zeus, Hermes, Achilles. And so since we don't believe in them, and if we did, that would make us polytheists, that means angels are not gods. And then he says the Bible declares there's only one God. There are no other gods but him. Angels are inferior to God, do not have God's attributes. So what he does in one very sly 3 sentences is basically, well, I wrote this in a long time ago up in the margin. We're throwing aside any mention of Elohim and going only with, quote, angel. In other words, he's going to study now for the next 206 pages the concept of angels, but he's never going to talk about Elohim because they don't exist. And he told you that in 3 sentences on page 21. So now, what I'm about to do, Mike, in this podcast, I usually take an hour or two in an undergraduate class, and I have a chalkboard, and I try to explain all this. And usually, I turn around and I look at a sea of confused faces. So let's try it on our podcast here. And what I'll do is go through how we got the word angel in verse 7. Historically speaking, what happened linguistically to get that word even in there, to me, is a fascinating story. And what I would, of course, love for you to do is pretend you're an 18-year-old freshman who hasn't heard this stuff before. And you get to raise your hand and say, Prof, what do you mean by that part where you said that part? So, fair enough?
Fair enough. It's many decades ago, but yes, fair enough.
Bringing back the decades. All right, so in that book, angels are all those non-human beings, spirits, we'd call them, in between God and man. So again, thinking like that author, we believe in angels as a category of existence, and we disbelieve in gods as a category of existence. So far, so good? Mm-hmm. Now, what the DCW will do is go the opposite direction. Here's how I think, and again, within our little culture, if people are uncomfortable with this, think of the next 30 minutes as a way to get them comfortable, and that is this. I believe in gods, but I don't believe in angels. And the way to get there is, here we go, okay? Number 1, the word behind, again, I'm going to go through this relatively, punctual. I mean, I'm going to not be fast, but I'm not going to explain things unless you think I need to explain them. Fair enough? Mm-hmm. Number 1, the word behind angel here in 16:7 is malach. It's a noun. There is no verbal form in the Masoretic text, but the noun form is every 210 times or so in the Old Testament, malach. Okay? Mm-hmm. So when I read 16:7, I could have said, now the malach of Yahweh. That's literally what you have there. And it's repeated, that word malach is 210 times. Number 2, the meaning of malach is not mysterious. It's not religious. It's not a curiosity. It's just straightforward messenger. So you'll have of the 210. It depends on your version of the Bible you carry. The word angel will occur less than 210 because not every time that malach is in the text will the text put the word angel in place of it. But the word malach It just means if you double click on it in your Bible software program, it will say messenger. Okay, good so far? So
yeah,
why?
I would just add though, is like I'm looking at my Logos, word study, and it brings up some prominent examples where it's not just the word angel or messenger. And
Okay. What do
I
they
never
have in
noticed
place?
this before, but like 2 Samuel 11:1, it mentions in that verse, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, but it's the word malak.
Okay. That's Melech. I bet you got Melech there. Malach, because Melech is king, Malach is messenger. Is that
Yeah, you're
possible?
right. Yeah, that is interesting. Wonder why then the word study does that.
Well, that had to be manually put in. So somebody maybe didn't catch the difference between a Melech and a Malach there, but yeah. I mean, we have, well, I'll get to it in my examples, but the word just means messenger. So why doesn't here's my next question. Why doesn't Genesis 16:7 just say the messenger of Yahweh? Well, it could. I wish it had. It would have solved a lot of problems. The Orthodox Jewish Bible, copyright 2002, does read the messenger of Adonai. So in other words, a Jewish translator of that version decided just to put the word messenger there, and I think that's faithful. So it's very rare you'd see messenger in 16:7, but that's just because of a choice. So here's the question. How did it come to be the word angel? There's a whole story behind it. Well, and here we go. Like the word woman or wife in Hebrew, they're both Isha. Why would you translate it woman in Genesis 2:22 and then translate the same word as wife in 2:23? He will hold fast to his wife. Well, because the context as a translator, fair enough, this is a difficult thing. You have to make judgment calls. You have to translate the same Hebrew word differently depending on context. Again, like woman, wife would be one simple example. Okay. In this case, number 5 in my list here of thinking through this, in this case, the translator in 16:7 believed the messenger was not human, but divine. And that's going to be kind of playing out in the story. So going into the discussion of why did the translator in your Bible, ESV, New King James, whatever we have, put the word angel there, they made a mental choice to say to themselves, this messenger is not human. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then I ask, well, what word would fit then? If I can't say messenger or don't want to, and I want to say divine messenger, what word would I use for that? And here's the issue. There is no word for that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, there is no word for divine messenger. So they're stuck. They've either got to go with messenger or whatever word you have there. You could have put gobbledygook in 16:7, and you would have caused the reader to say, what's a gobbledygook? And you'd say, well, that's a divine messenger. But we chose, again, what I'm backing way up and saying, here's how it got there. Here's my next point. And you have to go into history for this. Go to the first English Bible. That's Wycliffe, 1382 or so. He's a priest living in Britain. He used the Latin Vulgate, the standard text of Western Christianity at that time, with a team of priests like himself who had no knowledge of Hebrew or Greek. And their job was to vernacularize the Latin text into Middle English. So it's the first English version, we call it, of the Bible, 1382-ish or so, Middle English. If you've ever seen the original Wycliffe, it's, a lot of words you can kind of make out, but Middle English is hard for English people to read. So here's what they did. And for example, this is again what translators have to do. They came upon a word in Matthew 3:6 called, in Latin, baptismus. Baptismus in Latin. In the Vulgate, and instead of translating it into dip or wash, which is the actual meaning of baptismus in Latin, they decided to invent a new English word. 3 guesses. Baptism. Baptize. Mm-hmm. They actually invented an English word. Well, they transliterated a word, baptismus. They invented an English word So that when you're reading that as a Catholic or Anglican now, you have a word that you would never have known what it meant. And so you'd ask your priest, "Sir, what does the word baptize mean?" He'd have to tell you because it's not translated, it's transliterated. Fair enough?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So likewise, in 1607, and this is in the Wycliffe Bible, they came upon the Latin word angelus, 1607. The angelus, Angelus. Instead of translating it into messenger, which they could have done because the Hebrew word behind it is malach, messenger, they decided to invent a new English word, angel, never before been heard. But Middle English gives us this word angel. So when someone read an English Wycliffe Bible, then they would have had two questions. If I'm sitting in the audience, I would say, "Sir, what does baptize mean?" And he would, because he's a Catholic, he would sprinkle. He would show me what it means to baptize. He would hold up a little baby infant and he would put water on its head and say, "That's what baptize means." There was a theological conspiracy at hand, I think, going on, because if I translated that word as dip or immerse, and then I sprinkled the child, the audience would say, "Why are you not baptizing?" Or why are you doing that when the word means to dip? Well, that's how they got around it. They invented a word, and they could make that word mean whatever they wanted it to mean because they didn't tell you what it was. It's like in Job 40. What's a behemoth? I know, it's a behemoth. See what I've done? I've not told you what a behemoth is in Hebrew. I've just taken the letters and handed them to you in English. And now we have a behemoth, or whatever it is in Job 40. If you say, "What's a behemoth?" and I say, "Well, that's a behemoth," I've not told you anything. I've just, transliterated the letters across. That's what they did with baptize. They invented a word so they didn't have to translate it. They could invent meaning and put it right under that word.
I guess I would push back on. I wouldn't say it was necessarily a very conscious conspiracy. I would say it's probably more of it was well intentioned and also a quick shortcut, maybe a very not well thought out shortcut,
Okay.
right? Because
I'll buy that. It was a not well thought out shortcut. Yeah.
Yeah, because like years ago, please don't judge me, but years ago before we got married, my wife and I were into watching like these dance reality show competitions. I think partly because we were thinking like we probably wanted to do some sort of special dance for our wedding and whatever else. And one of the judges of the shows had this catchphrase that she would say all the time that, especially if she really enjoyed the performance of the dancer, she would call that person a hot tamale. Okay. Now, as a good American-born Chinese guy, I had no idea what a tamale was. But I just simply took that as like, okay, meaning this was a great performance, or you're really proficient at what you're doing. It would be years later that I realized that the word tamale is actually a Spanish word related to food.
Right.
And so like that's what I mean by like a very, not well thought out mental shortcut, where you hear a word and you see something associated with it, but you have no clue what was the origin or what the original meaning actually was connected to. You're just hearing it based on your context at that moment that you're observing. And it's only would be like, for me, in my case, years later to realize, oh, it's a delicious part of like Spanish and Mexican cuisine. Yeah. That's what she meant, but she was using it as a metaphor, but I had no clue what the metaphor was drawing from.
Interesting. Yeah. So maybe I'm being too strong on my conspiratorial whatever, but it's just interesting to me that you could have, as a Wycliffe, you could have said dip immerse, because that's what baptisma means in Greek, right? So why not just tell me what it means instead of creating, which they did, an English word that they didn't need to create. But anyway, now they come to angel, or here's the thing: if I raise my hand in the church of Wycliffe's day, and I say, you have the word angel, A-N-G-E-L, in 16:7. What is an angel? I've never heard of that term. And and Wycliffe would say, well, and see, notice he gets to tell you whatever he wants to tell you. There's no definition because he made up an English word. He took it from angelus, but angelus means messenger. And if I knew Hebrew, I would have said, well, you put angel here. You invented a word I've never heard of. Why didn't you just say, messenger? And he would say, that's where I'd say, why? I don't know what he would have said. But here's the point. He invented an English word and he put it in our text. And if a person says, well, that's too far to say he invented a word, remember the English word angel did not exist until that time. So he did invent a word. I'm going to challenge that point, and I think I can win that argument. He invented an English word. And the meaning behind that, he now gets to put anything he wants there. So that today we'll say, what is an angel? Well, that's what a cherubim is. Well, who made up that rule? Mm-hmm. Who made up the rule that a cherubim of 322 is an angel of 16:7? That's only because we have allowed the church, historians, theologians, whatever, to invent a word in 1382 and then pack it with whatever meaning they want, including the movie, it's the Michael Keaton one where he's a molting angel standing at the refrigerator eating drinking a Budweiser. What's the name of that movie? It's in other words, what is an angel? It's a guy there, or it's a being that looks like blank, blank, and blank. We're the ones packing all that information in there and we have the right to. We invented the term, so we have a right to make it mean whatever we want it to mean. And again, if that sounds strong, here's why, again, I would say, how can I say I believe in gods but not in angels? Well, look at the original text. The word angel isn't there. It isn't there. And so someone put it there, but that doesn't mean I have to believe in them. I get to go back to the Hebrew that's behind that word, and I see messenger. That's all I've got. So how's it going so far, Mike? I mean, again, can you imagine me turning back, looking at my class now, and they're either confused or they're not buying it because they have grown up with angels. And it's right there, Dr. Johnson. It's right in the text, the angel of the Lord. And I say, well, that's the trick. They stuck it in there, but the word is messenger. That's all that's there.
I think this is, I I agree. I agree with you on the, they had the right since Wycliffe basically invented it. He transliterated it from Latin into English. But this also does bring up, in many ways, the reality of the limitations of English. As great as the language is, and is probably the only really proficient language I speak now these days. I had one, church theologian professor who really challenged the concept that English is not really a language. And he explained that English is essentially a hodgepodge, a mishmash of French, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, Latin, Spanish. Yeah. It essentially just glommed in all these terms, often at times transliterated from different languages as well, right, and then just codified as English. Right?
There we go. And so that's all I'm saying is that we've codified a word, English, or angel in English, and we hadn't thought through the problems that we're going to cause future generations by codifying a word that we invented at this, on the spot when we could have translated it and we didn't. That's all I'm saying. So,
yeah, it did bring up. I remember watching this linguist who was explaining, for example, the evolution of all the Romance languages from Latin, and that they're all at different regions. So you have French, you have Spanish, you have Italian, you have all these different, you even have Romanian. You have all these languages that essentially were at one point dialects, local regional dialects. But over time, because the people are pronouncing the words in their own unique way because of their, ethnicity, their environment, or whatever else, eventually it got to a point where everyone realized, holy cow, we're actually speaking completely different languages. I, as a French speaker, cannot understand my Spanish neighbor, even though we originally were speaking Latin. but it had evolved and changed through our own regional differences to the point that we're now incomprehensible to one another, but they all derive from original root family versus English doesn't have that. It's just, we just started just tacking on and essentially like taking a hammer and adding a 2x4 every time we hit a problem.
Yeah. When we keep piling on, after a while, we use a word and we did not. Yeah. We possibly invented the whole concept. So now backing up, let's continue this argument. And I would say to the class, okay, put that what I've just said aside. Why can I believe in gods as an English word? Here's my argument. And I know Mike was all about, his aha moment was Psalm 82, sitting in, church that day. For me, it was a conversation with Mike about that, but really it was more like Psalm 8:5. You have made man a little lower than the Elohim. Well, there you go. If they don't exist, then I don't exist. That's how I would have taken that, or how I learned to understand that. Then it was just the constant pounding of the Hebrew text that I finally just looked at, and it was verses like Deuteronomy 10:17. Yahweh is Elohim of Elohim. Deuteronomy 3:24. For what Elohim is there in heaven, on earth, besides, let's skip that for the sake of a rhetorical argument there. 4:7. What nation has an Elohim so close to them as Yahweh? Exodus 18:11. Yahweh is greater than all the Elohim. Judges 11:24. Jephthah says, will you not possess whatever Chemosh your Elohim gives you? It's part of the argument, in other words, that this Elohim exists. 1 Chronicles 16:25, David says Yahweh is to be feared above all Elohim. 2 Chronicles 2:5, Solomon, for great is our Elohim above all Elohim. Psalm 96:4, Yahweh is a great Elohim and a king above all Elohim. Psalm 97:7, worship him, all you Elohim. 97:9, for you, Yahweh, are high above all the earth. You are exalted far above all Elohim. I could go on, and that's, for me, the aha moment of just looking at the text saying, what did I do with these beings before? When the whole story of the Old Testament is, if they're not real, then who in the world are these beings? Or, what is God talking about, or what are people talking about? And then on the level of, what about Yahweh? Would Yahweh ever take the chance or take the opportunity? So goes my logical mind. If Elohim don't exist, let's listen to the arguments that Yahweh would put in his own mouth. How would he talk about them? Exodus 12:12, against all the Elohim of Egypt, I will execute judgment. Exodus 23:4, you shall have no other Elohim before me, for I am Yahweh, a jealous Elohim. 34:14, you shall worship no other Elohim. 23:13, make no mention of the name of other Elohim. 23:24, you shall not bow down to their Elohim, nor serve them, nor do after their works. That implies reality behind them. Otherwise, why would you say that? Here's, again, a big one, 23:32, Exodus. You shall make no covenant with them, nor with their Elohim. A perfect place for God to say, by the way, they don't exist. You can't make a covenant with something that doesn't exist. But just the opposite. Again, I could go on, but the aha moment for me was just sitting down. Again, I remember doing it at Perkins, or our local cafe, till 2 a.m, just looking at watching the word Elohim be used, and it stunned me. Like, where were these guys this whole time? How come I didn't see them? And I'm sure you have your story there too. So now comes the question, if I believe that Elohim exists, what about these things called messengers, or, well, I don't want to say the word angel, but I'll say it one more time. If Elohim exists, plural Elohim, created spirits, what about these messenger beings that show up, for example, in 16:7? Could that be an Elohim? And here's where you can, again, I would say this would be another hour conversation. But what you do is you simply triangulate between the stories of a malach, or an angel, and where the text then says that was an Elohim. Genesis 28:12 compared to Genesis 35:7. I'm going to save that conversation for our actual study in Genesis, because we're going to get there. Probably the easiest one for time is Daniel 3:25 and 28. Nebuchadnezzar looks into a furnace where he has thrown three human beings. He has never taken a class in Israelite theology. And so when he says what he says, I take it to mean this. He's talking just extemporaneously how all people of that time period, he's talking Aramaic, which is close to Hebrew. And he says this, the form of the fourth being is a Bar Elohim, a son of the gods, a son of God, or what he would have meant then, a divine class being. So that's all he's saying is I'm looking into the furnace. I see three humans and one non-human. And the only term I have for that is a Bar Elohim, or a son of the gods, a divine class being. So I can get out of that story that, again, he's not talking theology. He's talking practical reality, that there's two ways of existing in Nebuchadnezzar's mind. You're either human or a god. Now, if that's fair, then I drop down three more verses, Daniel 3:28, and he says, your God sent a malach into the furnace. So he right there between three verses, he compares a Bar Elohim to a malach. And to me, that would be an example of, and again, this is repeated in several stories of the Old Testament, where you get a divine being slash Elohim or a slash messenger in the same story. So here's my point. And again, I'm hoping this is all background for you, Mike, but I'm saying it in front of you so that you can respond as though you're that 18-year-old. An Elohim describes the nature of a being, divine, deity, God, if you want, while a malach describes the function of either a human or an Elohim. In other words, you can put the word malach, messenger, on anybody, be it human or divine. But the nature of that being doesn't change whether it's human or divine. So that's how I come to believe in Elohim, but not in angels, because Elohim has meaning in Hebrew. Angel is an English word invented in 1382 that has no meaning to me as an English-speaking person when I read the Bible. Okay? All right, so presuming that my classroom has followed me, here's what I do with 16:7 then. Now, the messenger, this is how I'd read it then, a divine, let's even go with it. Now, a divine messenger or an Elohim class being of Yahweh came to Hagar. Now, what do we do with that of Yahweh part? Here becomes, again, a huge difference of opinion, even within divine council members. In my opinion, and again, I'll probably never say angel again, unless I'm reading the text, because I want to get away from that English word. What I think, what we have to do is get rid of the idea that this is one particular messenger, and here's why. There is no article in front of malach. Okay, so the Hebrew article, hey or ha, is not there. So it reads in Hebrew, now messenger of Yahweh, found her by a spring. So let's again do some textual work, background on this. Can you say the blank of Yahweh in Hebrew, the blank of Yahweh? And again, here's where your software will do your work for you. The phrase of the Lord occurs 1,683 times in the ESV. If you look at the Hebrew behind those 1,600 times, coming into 16:7, it's been used, the phrase of the Lord occurs 8 times or so. And it's 3:8, the sound of the Lord, 3:8, the presence of the Lord, 4:16, the presence of the Lord, 4:1, the help from the Lord, 4:26, the name of the Lord, 12:8, the name of the Lord, 6:8, the eyes of the Lord. These are all Yahweh when I say the Lord. 13:10, the garden of Yahweh. And now 16:7, finally, the angel of Yahweh. So we have the word the in English placed in front of many, if not every occurrence of a word that comes into that phrase, the blank of the Lord. Okay, so the idea of saying the eyes of the Lord, that's available in English. But here's the point. In every one of the cases I just read, there's no article on any of those examples. It doesn't say the eyes of Yahweh in the text. It says eyes of Yahweh, garden of Yahweh, name of Yahweh. We in English put the word the in front of it because those are Yahweh's eyes. So we say the eyes of Yahweh, but in Hebrew it just reads eyes of Yahweh. Am I making sense so far?
Yeah.
There's no definite article placed on the word eyes, sound, presence, whatever. There are, but by the way, there are ways to say a blank of Yahweh, not the of Yahweh, but they're like a prophet of Yahweh, 1 Samuel 3:20, a covenant of Yahweh, 1 Samuel 20, verse 8. So you can, in context, by the way, again, a word is used, say in Hebrew, a storm of Yahweh, Jeremiah 23:19. And again, you will not use the article. But you'll translate it as though it's a storm of Yahweh or a prophet of Yahweh based on the context. The point is, in all those cases, the article is missing, including now, let's get to every occasion of the angel of Yahweh. That's 56 times in the Hebrew Bible. Well, again, the messenger of Yahweh, or Malach Yahweh, occurs 56 times in the Old Testament. Not one of them have the article. So it's just a miscalculation. If someone's, I just heard this on a podcast about a week ago. It's again, I'm not here to complain, but it's a very well-respected podcast, and many people listen to it. And yet he said, Ha Malach Yahweh, as an example of his belief in something. And I said, I was alone in the car. Well, I won't tell you what I said. I basically said, you liar. How dare you? You know Hebrew. That's the thing. This guy he knows Hebrew. And he said, Ha Malach Yahweh, as though to say the messenger of Yahweh. He lied. He lied. There is no example of Ha Malach Yahweh. And how a person can say that so glibly, it just stuns me, because all you got to do again is look at the software and watch what your software shows you. So Malach itself can take the article, 2 Samuel 11:19, the messenger of so-and-so, the messenger. So Malach can take an article. That's not the problem. It's just that when you say Malach of Yahweh, the way grammar works in Hebrew, Yahweh can't have an article. So you'll never put the article in front of any word that fronts, in the genitive sense, something of Yahweh. So that's why you'll never see the name of Yahweh as Ha-Shem or Ha-Shem. Or the eyes of Yahweh, you'll never see the word Ha or the in front of the word eyes. It's just the way Hebrew grammar works. And again, it's just, do you want to say the angel? Go ahead and say it, but just realize, don't say Ha Malach. That's not what's in the text. So my big point so far, again, I'm trying to explain this to a classroom. I've had so many bad experiences here. It's hard to say this without flinching. There is no the angel of the Lord in the Bible. There is in Hebrew. There is a messenger of Yahweh, and here's our first occurrence of it, right here in 16:7. There's a messenger of Yahweh, and so now we have to ask, what in the world is, or who is this messenger of Yahweh, and how does he relate to Yahweh? Is he Yahweh? Those kind of questions now come from that conversation, but let's get our bearings straight. It does not say the. And so anyone who says, see, there's a certain one who's always named, no, that's just not there. What do you think so far, Mike? Are you with me?
I'm with you. I do also have a bit of sympathy in some sense to translators, in that, I agree and I understand you are right. There is no Ha, or even for folks who've never taken Hebrew, the article can often be absorbed, like the sound, its vowel sound can be absorbed into the first consonant of the actual word.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you may not even see
of the noun.
Yeah, exactly. You won't even see the consonant hey with the vowel sound. It would just have been absorbed into the first word just because of how it was supposed to sound. And sound is a very important thing for Hebrew.
Right.
So I get what you're saying, Ron. There is no article. I think, and also this is a little reminder for folks that a little bit of languages can be dangerous, especially if you don't know the grammar mm-hmm. and how the rules play out. Because then we may be saying something theologically that then we have no actual grammar basis underneath. So then it becomes like walking on sand. But I do think, in some sense, when we have to remember that when we're reading the translations, the translators, the committees, they are they are dealing with the current verse, but at the same time, they're also dealing with the larger context of what will come in the story that's coming ahead. And so
Right.
I can see the translators making a decision. Yes, we know there is no article in front of the word malak, but we will use the word the in English to indicate that this messenger, and in how you would say it, a divine messenger, it's not just any divine messenger, it's a very special divine messenger because of what happens in the story. And some would take, especially what Hagar would later say about an angel of the Lord, that, oh, this is even more special of a messenger, more special than other messengers. Like they do, almost wanting to give a little extra honor to this particular being.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's fair. And I would say, let's let that happen as it happens. And so to be fair to the text of, again, the first time reader, listener, here's how I would just even cross off words in my own Bible. Now, and I crossed off crossed off angel. And I just have, now Yahweh's messenger found her by a spring of water. That's all I've got. That's all I know. Yahweh sent a messenger. And I don't know if it's human. I don't know if it's divine. I have to find out by reading what happens. Verse 10, now now Yahweh's messenger said to her, quote, I. Whoa, there. So to be fair, and now let's keep reading in our story. So Yahweh's messenger found her by a spring of water. I'm in 16:7. This is Hagar. She's just been cast out because of the child she had, a young little boy. She's going to have a boy, I believe. Yeah, he's not born yet. Mm-hmm. By the spring on the way to Shur. And this messenger, said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. So Yahweh's messenger said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. So whatever's happening in our video version of this, she's talking to a guy, right? From what we can tell, she's talking to, somebody, but it's a physical presence in front of her that all the text is telling me so far is it's a messenger. And again, we could have gone to 2 Samuel 11 to find examples of human messengers. So we're not told in the text yet, by the text itself, what kind of messenger we're dealing with. Verse 10, then Yahweh's messenger said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly so that they shall not be counted for multitude. Now that would have stunned me if I'm Hagar, right? I'm talking to a guy sitting where am I sitting? By a spring of water. And he has the audacity to sound like he has control of my ability to procreate. I will multiply your descendants. Verse 11, and Yahweh's messenger said to her, behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. Remember, he's half Egyptian, because Yahweh has heard your affliction. Verse 12, he shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Let's talk about that in our next episode when we get into 17 and he's actually born. And then we have this description of Ishmael. Basically, what you have in that verse or that prediction is he's going to be a wilderness Bedouin kind of family line. He's going to be his hand against every man is a common way of saying, and you can get this out of cultural study Bibles. He is going to be living a lifestyle that is, remember the Midianites that by Joshua or Joseph in chapter 37, they're also called Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites and Midianites kind of back and forth because Ishmaelites get grouped into this nomadic group of buyers and sellers, even of slaves and that kind of stuff. So it's not as though it's what she's being told. Let's just summarize. Hagar's being told by this divine messenger or this messenger of Yahweh that her child is going to have a rough life. He's going to give, does he say that he's going to be, no, he's going to say later that he's going to have, 12 princes come from him. So he's going to have quite a heritage. He's going to be, shall we say, famous, but he is going to be, as he says, his hand will be against him, every man's hand. He's going to live a tough life. 13. Let's see. Well, let's stop right there. And we'll close it up with 13 to 16. But here's where we can spend the rest of our time. What about this I will? How do you get a messenger using the word I? What do we do with this? And here's where academic research has gone. Just to, again, quickly summarize. Like a cultural study Bible, and I'll pull one out. This is the New King James Version Cultural Background Study Bible. I believe Walton is one of the editors of the Old Testament. Here's what he has in 16:7. In the ancient world, direct communication between important parties was a rarity. Diplomatic and political exchange normally required the use of an intermediary whose function was similar to that of an ambassador today. The messenger who served as the intermediary was a fully vested representative of the party he represented. He spoke for the party with the authority of that party. He was accorded the same treatment as that party would enjoy were he there in person. While this was standard protocol, there is no confusion about the person's identity. This explains how, and he's talking about 16:7 here, this angel in this chapter can comfortably use the first person to convey what God will do, verse 10. When official words were spoken by the representative, everyone understands that he is not speaking for himself, but is merely conveying the words, opinions, policies, and decisions of his liege. So in Ugaritic literature, when Baal sends messengers to Mot, the messengers use first-person forms of speech. Such usage indicates that the messengers are not only envoys, but actually embody the power of the deity who sent them. That's referencing like a book and I bought this, I remember, in 2008. I was standing with Mike at the time. I remember at SBL. How do you like this title? Lesser Deities in the Ugaritic Texts in the Hebrew Bible. That's the kind of book I want to read going to sleep at night. It's a wonderful book. It's his dissertation, but he's basically comparing the Ugaritic deities that are not El, well, like Baal and Mot, and how they relate to El with how other deities of the Hebrew pantheon compare to Yahweh. And it's a fascinating and very easily readable dissertation. Page 172, he's getting into how the messenger concepts work in that day. In ancient Semitic literature, messengers often did not distinguish themselves from their sender when delivering messages, so that the messengers speak in the first person as if the sender of the message speaks. This formula may be applied in the same way to the delivering patterns of divine messengers. And he has, example after example of not just Ugaritic literature, but Old Testament literature, like in a Joshua 11 story where you have Jephthah sending messengers to a guy and a whole paragraph of first person. And you're thinking you're hearing Jephthah because I this, I that. And then the text ends, Joshua 11:27, with that's what the messenger said. So the point is that the concept of agency in the Bible, and this is again where academics generally have landed over time, that when we say John the Baptist was, quote, beheaded by Herod, or Joseph sold grain to the whole world, Genesis 45. We know that it wasn't Joseph doing it. It was his ambassadors. Joseph never sold a thing, probably, when he was at that stage. He was the one in charge of selling. So is that enough to leave for now? We could go through biblical texts if we needed. And I say this to our audience, that the number of biblical texts that have this kind of thing where an envoy, a messenger, walks up to someone and uses the first person is done with Nathan and David, it's done with Jephthah, it's done with Haggai, and there's so many examples. Then when you go to Ugaritic literature and other comparative ancient works, they do the same thing. When an envoy goes to a human, they say this, but they are talking for their leader. Okay, so that's, I think, why this being says I. In other words, she's not thinking... the story wouldn't have been understood as though the I counts as anyone but the one who sent this being. He's speaking for the one who has sent him. Okay.
If I can offer a little, I do understand what you're mentioning, and even the dictionary of deities and demons, DDD, if folks are trying to understand the whole entire article thing as well, it has a great entry about the angel or a angel of the Lord. Okay. And explains a little bit about the grammar of like why you can't put the article ha, especially in front. Yeah. Just grammatically, it just wouldn't work. But I do think that this, and you've used this metaphor before, and I do love it. Of this, essentially, like different theologians will end up in different positions about who is or what is an angel of the Lord, or what is Yahweh's messenger. Yeah, and I think depending on what are the underlying presumptions. And in this case, I think also the presumptions about Yahweh, or how would Yahweh operate, right. That's where people will end up in different spots. And it's okay to end up in different spots because their theological grounding, I think oftentimes when you have dialogue and conversation with folks who may differ with you on this, for this example, and we can get into this in the next episode, definitely. And so maybe I'll just leave it at that where you end up in the journey through the forest, and you can see each other through the trees for a moment, the pathways are not going to be the same. Right. But you're close enough to be able to have dialogue and converse about this. And it's pretty cool to understand, like, okay, this is the theological underpinning under presumption that's being brought. Is that invalid? Not necessarily. And I think that's something that we have to be comfortable with as we, deal out and just really flesh out a divine counsel worldview, that there are going to be certain presumptions because of our backgrounds and our religious experiences and even personal experiences that brings out certain aspects of theology that are, maybe personally for the person that you're speaking with, very important, or especially experientially wise. Right? Because I would be sensitive about how I describe this with a person who is dealing with living in a land where they are essentially treated as a second-class citizen because they are a Christian, right? Because of the surrounding majority culture that they're in, where it's a very strict monotheism to such a point that this kind of dialogue would be seen as blasphemous, if not deserving of death. And those would use these kind of verses to push back on that of, hey, there's no justification for you to killing my people and my kind, because even the scriptures that we share seems to give a hint, gives me room to believe this concept about God. And so I think we have to be sensitive to those things as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. And certainly we'll get into this as we continue through the story of Genesis, where other Malachim, plural, will be in the story. Jacob seems to wrestle with the Malachim in 32. He has a dream of Malachim going up and down a ladder in 28. So we're going to come upon Malachim here and there, and we're going to have to keep thinking, what in the world are these beings, and who is the, if you want to call it the or whatever, this messenger that shows up, if it's the same one every time, that kind of question. So in the end, let's just summarize, and then we'll get into our next podcast next time by talking about this boy Ishmael. In the end, my recommendation is that this is a divine messenger, a God. If you want, again, that English word God is so, people just don't like that little word God with a small g on it. They don't mind the word deity, but they don't like the word God for some reason, because it just smacks of polytheism, I guess. So, but in my English, I'm okay with it. I guess I'll say it that way. That this is a divine messenger. It's a God or a deity who meets Hagar, and under the authority of the sender, Yahweh, tells her about her soon-to-be-born son, Ishmael. It's undecided in the text so far, I would say, unless we get, and we'll keep moving through the story of Israel, story that's in Genesis, whether this is a loyal messenger of Yahweh, whether this is a disloyal messenger of Yahweh, we don't know yet. Again, if I'm reading it, I would raise my hand to my teacher and say, okay, I've got a malach here who's being sent by Yahweh. Can you tell me whether he's good or bad? And I would say, let's keep reading. We don't know yet. And by the time we're going to finish 17 next time, hopefully this is a reason to listen to the next podcast, I'm going to give my opinion, my personal opinion, that we are dealing with an Elohim here who is ultimately nefarious, that he is not going to lead Ishmael, or put it this way, the deity that Ishmael worships will not be Yahweh. And how does he get to that position may have been influenced by this being here. In other words, well, that's even one of the questions. Is the messenger that shows up in 16 the deity that Ishmael ends up following, creating a covenant with in 17? And so that's the question of, again, a divine council worldview believes in covenants of these deities. And so we're going to always be asking, is it possible that what we have here is a story of another covenant made by a man who in 500 AD will be worshipped as the head prophet of Muslims. So in other words, we're going to come upon a story much later outside of the Bible where Ishmael is revered as the founder, the genealogical head of a man named Muhammad, who claims that the whole story should be reread as though not Isaac, but Ishmael. Right? That's how Muslims take this text. It's not Isaac that's chosen, it's Ishmael. And so since we know that, we're sitting so far down the story that it's hard not to read this, and we'll try to do this next time. We'll try to read it fairly with the text in mind. It's hard reading it fairly when you know where it goes and how disparate these two boys lead their people groups. The tribe of Ishmael and the tribe of Isaac end up being vastly different groups in world history. So fair enough.
Fair enough.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. And again, 17 will have its share of interest for us all. So thank you so much.